What if I told you some spirits never left their graves, and tonight they might be watching you? If you love ghost stories, hit subscribe, tap like, and share this video so we can bring you even more terrifying tales. Subscribe, like, share to keep the ghosts coming. It begins, as all ghost stories do, not with a scream but with a whisper. The whisper is small, almost imperceptible, like the rustle of plastic against fabric, the faint shuffle of something that should not move. Children hear it first, for their ears are tuned to the secret frequencies of the unseen. A doll in the corner of the room seems to shift when no one is looking. Its eyes, painted glass and harmless under the light, seem to glimmer in the darkness with something alive. They dismiss it as imagination, until the imagination grows teeth. The legend of Chucky is not merely a tale of blood and cinema, nor the creation of Hollywood's twisted factory of nightmares. No, it is something older, more primal, something woven into the very fabric of America's haunted history. Every nation has its ghosts. Mexico has the weeping woman, La Llorona, who wanders riversides in eternal grief. Japan has the Onryo, vengeful spirits bound by rage. Europe has its castles stalked by pale, translucent figures. America, a land born of many migrations and many stories, gave birth to a smaller ghost, a child-sized fiend with a painted smile. His name was Chucky, and his shadow stretches longer than his body ever could. The whisper of Chucky began in a toy aisle. The 1980s were an era of consumer worship, when the hum of television blended with the chant of jingles, when children were told their happiness could be bought, boxed, and carried home. Toys spoke, blinked, walked, and danced, each promising friendship that never ended. Parents bought them in droves, stacking birthdays and Christmas mornings with bright plastic faces. And yet, behind every shiny-eyed doll lurked the unspoken question: what if the thing you gave your child to comfort them was the very thing that betrayed them? The first stories were laughed at. Children in Chicago swore their good guy dolls whispered back when the lights were off. A boy said his doll told him secrets about knives, about blood, about shadows that crept through windows. His mother, exhausted from work, ignored it, thinking it was imagination, until she found her son's bed slashed with something sharper than scissors. The doll sat at the edge of the sheets, smiling, its hand still clutching the toy knife accessory that came with the package. Plastic could not cut like that, yet the mattress bore wounds too deep for any child's prank. This was only the beginning. Rumors grew like fungus. A man in Detroit claimed he woke to find his daughter's doll standing at the foot of the bed, though her small hands had not moved it. A babysitter in New Jersey swore she heard laughter, guttural and wrong, spilling from the doll's sewn mouth. The stories were dismissed, as they always are, dismissed until the weight of them became too heavy to ignore. And still, behind these whispers, there was the shadow of an older story, the legend of Robert the Doll, the cursed plaything of Key West, whose smirk has unsettled visitors for more than a century. Robert, with his sailor's outfit and button eyes, was said to house the spirit of a child's fury, a malice that never grew old. Those who disrespected Robert met with car accidents, illnesses, sudden misfortune. His legend seeped into the cultural soil, and from that soil grew a new root, twisted and red, sprouting into the form of Chucky. But unlike Robert, whose power was whispered from generation to generation, Chucky's was amplified by screens. He was not confined to a single museum case. His story was broadcast, projected, replicated across thousands of theaters, millions of living rooms. Fiction bled into folklore, and folklore bled back into fiction. People no longer asked, "Is Chucky real?" but instead, "What if he is?" In every ghost story there is a threshold, the moment when skepticism cracks and belief seeps in. For Chucky, that threshold was the uncanny valley. The dolls of the 1980s were not simple wooden carvings or rag-stuffed effigy. They were mass-produced companions with eyes that blinked and cheeks that flushed. They resembled us too closely, their faces sculpted to mimic innocence. To stare at one too long was to fall into unease, to feel watched by something that should not be watching. Chucky thrived in this valley, his plastic grin masking the human soul snarling within. He was the nightmare made visible, the inversion of trust. And so the stage was set. In a time when America's children clutched their toys to sleep, a darker possibility lurked, that the toy clutched back, that it whispered in the night, that it reached with small plastic hands, not to comfort, but to kill. Parents laughed, children shivered, and somewhere, something began to stir. They said Chucky was just a movie, just a story, just Hollywood. But America has always known that stories are never just stories. Stories are ghosts with paper masks, myths with celluloid faces, shadows projected on a wall to hide the real shadow behind. And in the alleys of Chicago, in the corners of children's bedrooms, in the rattling cases of toy stores long abandoned, the ghost of Chucky was. The haunting begins quietly, as all hauntings do. It slips in through cracks in the ordinary world, through the tiny fissures no one notices, until the house feels colder, until the laughter of a child sounds slightly off, until silence becomes thicker than the air itself. Chucky was never content to remain a creation of film alone. Ghosts have a peculiar hunger. The more they are spoken of, the stronger they become. With each retelling of his story, with each midnight dare whispered among friends, with each nervous glance at a doll left on the shelf, something grew. Something restless, something spectral, something that wanted more. People began to swear that Chucky followed them outside the theater. They would return home after watching Child's Play, only to hear faint rattling in their children's toy chests. Some woke at 3 in the morning to the sound of television static, only to see the image of a doll flicker across the screen, though no tape was in the player. Others spoke of dreams where the good guy doll stood at the foot of their bed, clutching a knife, its lips stretched into a smile that was too wide for its face. The dream always ended before the knife fell, but the terror lingered long after the morning light. At first, skeptics laughed. They said it was mass hysteria, suggestion planted by clever filmmakers, paranoia feeding on itself. But the stories kept piling, one on top of another, and even the most hardened doubters could not help but wonder, was there truly a ghost behind the doll? Something that had crawled from the shadows of America's collective fears and made its home in plastic flesh. The rumors grew darker. A collector in Ohio boasted of owning a screen-used Chucky puppet, purchased for thousands of dollars. He showed it proudly at conventions, posed it in photos, let visitors touch its scarred face. Within a year, his home burned to the ground under mysterious circumstances. Investigators claimed it was faulty wiring, yet the neighbors swore they heard laughter through the flames. Laughter that sounded far too alive for an empty house. In Louisiana, a priest was summoned by a desperate family who insisted that their child's doll spoke with a voice that was not its own. They tried throwing it away, but it always reappeared in the house. They buried it, but the next morning it was back on the shelf, smiling, waiting. When the priest attempted to bless it, the doll's head cracked down the middle, and a gush of foul-smelling liquid poured out, staining the floor like blood. The priest left shaken, refusing to return, his faith tested by the smile of molded plastic. Something was moving. It was not just a movie anymore. It was a haunting, a phenomenon, a possession that spread like wildfire through whispered tales. Some claimed that the spirit of Charles Lee Ray, the fictional killer whose soul animated the doll on screen, had crossed the veil. That in the fevered imaginations of millions, a door had been opened, and something walked through it wearing a doll's face. Others said it was older still, that Chucky was simply the newest mask worn by a spirit that had haunted dolls for centuries. The same spirit that once lingered in Robert, that stalked through the island of the dolls in Mexico, that whispered in porcelain faces across Europe, that the lines blurred between fiction and folklore. In schoolyards, children dared one another to summon Chucky by chanting his name 3 times in the dark. Much like the old rituals of Bloody Mary, parents found themselves uneasy buying dolls for their children, afraid of what might be hidden behind their glass eyes. Even the bravest collectors of horror memorabilia admitted that Chucky was different from other monsters, different from Freddy, different from Jason. Those were costumes, masks of terror. Chucky was something else. He was a body that could sit in your home, on your bed, on your couch. He could belong to you, and that was what made him terrifying. The supernatural began to weave itself into the story more openly. Paranormal investigators, always eager for the next case, began chasing down reports of Chucky-like hauntings. A group in Arizona claimed they set up cameras in a toy store that had been plagued by disturbances, footsteps in empty aisles, dolls falling from shelves, voices caught in the static of walkie-talkies. At 3 in the morning, one camera captured a doll moving its head slowly toward the lens. The footage leaked online, blurry and shaky, but enough to send shivers down the spine of anyone who watched. Skeptics called it a hoax, a trick of shadows. But believers pointed to the smirk on the doll's face and whispered that Chucky's ghost was growing stronger. And yet, beneath the surface, the story of Chucky was never only about one doll. It was about the power of belief, the way a story could become a spirit. Folklorists call it a tulpa, a being created from thought, born of concentrated imagination and fear. The more people believe, the more real it becomes. Was Chucky a tulpa, conjured from the minds of millions who feared him, given life by their nightmares? If so, then every scream in the theater, every sleepless night after watching his films, every whispered dare in a darkened room was feeding him, giving him strength, shaping him into something that could slip beyond fiction. Strange coincidences began to swirl around the franchise itself. Crew members on the original films spoke of accidents on set, props falling, lights shattering, sudden illnesses. One cameraman swore he saw the doll's eyes move when no puppeteer was controlling it. Another claimed he found scratch marks on his arm after working late in the studio. The stories were kept quiet, buried under Hollywood contracts, but whispers spread among those who dared speak. They said that Chucky's spirit was not confined to any one doll, but haunted them all. Any likeness of him a doorway for his presence. Collectors who hoarded Chucky merchandise sometimes reported unsettling phenomena. They would place a figure on the shelf, only to find it facing the opposite direction the next morning. Some swore they heard faint giggles when they passed by their display cabinets. Others confessed to dreams in which the doll spoke, promising companionship, promising power, promising death. These dreams left them shaken, sometimes sick, sometimes obsessed. They could not throw the dolls away. The dolls would not let them dot, and so Chucky's ghost grew, nourished by belief, by fear, by the strange marriage of folklore and film. He became not merely a character, but a presence. He slipped into the same current as the great hauntings of history, flowing among the legends of cursed objects and restless spirits. He was the American heir to the ghost doll tradition, a plastic vessel carrying centuries of superstition. The haunting built slowly, but like all hauntings, it longed for a climax. Whispers became voices, shadows became figures, dreams became apparitions. People began to see him where he should not be, in mirrors, in reflections on darkened windows, in the corners of photographs. Always small, always smiling, always watching. And those who saw him swore they could never forget the sound of his laughter, that shrill, mocking giggle that clung to their ears like a stain. The ghost of Chucky was no longer confined to stories told in the safety of daylight. He had entered the night, entered the home, entered the imagination so deeply that the night of the climax began as all ordinary nights do, with silence. Silence is the thin veil stretched between the living and the dead, between belief and manifestation. It is in silence that the first cracks appear, and through those cracks, things slip. For weeks, the stories had built like a gathering storm, dolls moving on their own. Whispers caught in recordings, laughter echoing through empty rooms. Skeptics smirked, believers trembled, and somewhere, in the churning ocean of collective fear, something began to rise. It happened first in Chicago, as if the city that birthed the legend would also birth its ghost. In a small apartment, a mother tucked her son into bed, the same son who had begged her for a good guy doll decades after the craze had ended. The doll had been bought second-hand, its packaging torn, its smile slightly too wide, its hair a shade too bright. That night, as the boy slept, the mother heard footsteps across the hardwood floor. She rose, thinking her son had woken, but when she opened his door, he lay asleep beneath the blankets. The doll was not where she had left it. It was standing by the window, facing out into the dark. She tried to convince herself she had moved it, forgotten somehow. But the next morning, her son's voice carried through the apartment in tones she had never heard before. Low, guttural, mocking. "Wanna play?" he asked, though his lips did not move the way a child's should. She entered the room, and the boy sat with the doll on his lap, both of them grinning with the same impossible smile. The mother swore the doll's plastic hand shifted, resting against her son's arm like a companion, like a parasite. Soon, other reports surged like wildfire. In New Orleans, a group of paranormal investigators live-streamed a seance meant to summon spirits of the bayou. Midway through their ritual, as candles flickered and shadows thickened, the cameras caught a small figure slipping past the doorway, a dull-sized silhouette carrying something glinting in its hand. The feed cut to black, and when it resumed, the investigators were gone, the room empty except for a doll sitting in the center of the floor. The footage spread online, dissected and dismissed by skeptics as a hoax. But believers knew the haunting had grown teeth. The ghost of Chucky was no longer content to linger at the edges. He had stepped into the center of the stage. his laughter spilling into the world like a toxin, his presence undeniable. Folklorists and spiritualists debated endlessly. Some insisted Chucky had become a tulpa, a thought form fed by the energy of millions. Others claimed he was a vessel for something older, a wandering spirit that wore whatever mask was most feared in the era. A few whispered darker theories that the fictional Charles Lee Ray, though invented by screenwriters, had become real through belief, the way names of demons grow power when spoken. If enough people believed a murderer's soul haunted a doll, perhaps the soul appeared, eager to occupy the waiting vessel of imagination. The evidence mounted. Families abandoned homes after nights filled with footsteps, after toys stacked themselves into pyramids, after laughter spilled from closets no one dared open. Priests, shamans, occultists were called, but none could banish what was never fully there. For ghosts are not bound by walls or rooms. They live in belief, in memory, in fear. Chucky's ghost needed no body to linger. It lived in the story itself, and stories cannot be exorcised, said. And then came the night when the veil tore wide open. It was a gathering unlike any other, a séance conducted not in secret, but in spectacle. A group of thrill-seekers in Los Angeles decided to host a Chucky summoning livestream, mocking the rituals of old, laughing as they chanted the words from the film, the fictional spell Charles Lee Ray had used to enter the doll. They lit candles shaped like knives, placed a Chucky replica in the center of the circle, and repeated the words as thousands watched online. At first, nothing happened. They laughed louder, jeering at the silence, but the viewers began to comment in panic, insisting they saw something behind the group shadows moving, eyes glinting, a small figure slipping closer. The streamers ignored it until the lights flickered and the doll in the circle began to move. Its head turned slowly toward the camera, its plastic mouth opening wider and wider, until laughter poured out. Laughter not from speakers or human throats, but from the very air itself. The candles blew out. The screen went black. The next day, the apartment was found empty. No bodies, no sign of struggle, only the doll sitting upright on the couch, smiling at the investigators who dared to touch it. They refused to remove it, insisting it was safer to leave it where it sat. The building was condemned, yet still people gathered outside, swearing they heard faint giggles when the wind blew. The climax was not confined to one night, one ritual. It spread, a plague of dread, a haunting carried in whispers and Every time someone repeated the story, the ghost grew stronger. Every time a child joked about summoning Chucky, the veil thinned. Every time a skeptic laughed, the laugh carried with it the echo of another laugh, high-pitched and mocking, following them into their dreams. What made this haunting unbearable was not simply the fear of violence, but the intimacy of it. Chucky was not a distant phantom in a crumbling castle or an old battlefield. He was in the bedroom, on the shelf, at the foot of the bed. He was small enough to be carried into any home, ordinary enough to blend with the toys children still clutched at night. He was everywhere, and that was the terror. And in the thick of this growing storm, spiritualists began to speak of him, not as a doll but as a ghost in disguise. They said he was not the spirit of one man, but a collective ghost of childhood fears, the embodiment of every nightmare where the beloved becomes the betrayer. Chucky was the specter of innocence corrupted, a demon with freckles and red hair, a haunting that needed no grave, because it lived in every home that dared to welcome a toy. The climax was not a single moment of revelation, but a long crescendo of dread. Reports rose, panic spread, and belief solidified into something undeniable. The ghost of Chucky had crossed over. He was no longer a story told on screens, but a spirit fed by the world's attention. He laughed in empty houses, whispered through televisions, shifted in the shadows of photographs. He was alive, in the only way a ghost could be. And as his presence deepened, one final truth revealed itself. He could not be destroyed. You cannot burn a story, cannot stab a ghost, cannot silence laughter that lives in imagination. The more you tried to deny him, the louder he grew. The more you tried to forget, the stronger he returned. He was eternal now, bound not to plastic but to the very fabric of folklore. The climax of Chucky's haunting was not the sight of his small figure moving in the dark, nor the sound of his shrill laughter echoing in the night. The true climax was the realization that he had won. The silence that fell after the screams subsided was not peace, nor was it relief, but a suffocating emptiness, the kind that presses against the skin and burrows into the lungs. The survivors stood or rather staggered through the aftermath of the night, That had folded in on itself like a grotesque nightmare stitched together from shadow and blood. Somewhere in the ruins of the old house, flames sputtered against half-rotted beams, casting fleeting light across splintered dolls and hollow eyes that no longer gleamed with possession. But the sense of victory, of deliverance, refused to arrive. The air carried with it a heavy weight, a whispering suspicion that nothing was ever truly over, not when one spoke of curses, of dolls born from violence, of ghosts that do not believe in endings. The ground beneath their feet seemed almost to breathe, exhaling faint draughts, as though the soil itself held on to echoes of Chucky's laughter, mocking, unfinished, promising return. As dawn's grey fingers began to stretch across the sky, every survivor's gaze turned not toward the rising sun, but toward the shadows it revealed. And in those shadows were shapes that seemed to twitch, that seemed to lean forward as if eager to listen to every thought and every heartbeat. The doll's body had burned, that much was true. Melted plastic dripping into the cracked floorboards like the blood of some unholy creature. Yet no one spoke the word gone. They knew better. In the realm of cursed things, the body was never the prison, only the vessel. What animated it, what prowled beneath porcelain or plastic skin, could slip free, invisible, lingering, waiting. Some swore they saw small footprints leading away from the ashes, as though a child with malformed legs had scampered into the woods at the edge of dawn. Others denied it, insisting it was imagination, a trick of nerves, stretched beyond breaking. But each denial trembled, each voice quaked, because none could silence the memory of the laughter, sharp and serrated, echoing even in the moments when their own thoughts tried to take control. The town itself bore scars deeper than any one survivor. Doors slammed shut, windows boarded, prayers whispered into hands pressed, white-knuckled together. Children who once played in streets now refused to speak above a whisper, as if a loud voice might draw him back, might remind the ghost where they lived. Churches filled with trembling souls, not out of faith but out of desperation, seeking to drown out a horror no sermon had ever prepared them for. Yet even within holy walls, the flicker of candles carried strange distortioned shadows shaped like stubby hands, like grins stretched too wide, like blades glinting where none should exist. It was as though the spirit had seeped into the fabric of the town, threading itself into every prayer, every frightened heartbeat, every trembling silence. The survivors realized they were not haunted in one house alone. They were haunted everywhere, by a presence that refused to be tethered to a single object, a single room, a single body. Whispers spread, first softly, then louder, until they became rumors too heavy to contain. Some claimed to see the doll again, restitched from scraps, crawling out of dumpsters, staring from alleyways before vanishing when the eye dared to blink. Others told of phones ringing in the middle of the night, static hissing on the line before a small voice whispered curses that twisted into manic laughter. Still others swore their children spoke with a friend no adult could see, a friend with a high-pitched laugh and a love for games that always ended in tears. Whether these stories were truth or paranoia mattered little. They spread like infection, and with each retelling, belief strengthened the ghost, gave it shape, gave it teeth. And then came the murders. Not many, not enough to turn the town into a spectacle of headlines and news vans, but enough to carve its name into the hearts of those who knew. Small, brutal, inexplicable. A family's pet gutted in their living room while every lock remained bolted. A man found dangling from his own attic rafters, mouth frozen in a scream no neighbor had heard. A child gone missing, the only trace a trail of muddy footprints too small to belong to any adult. The police sought explanations, logic, culprits with flesh and motive, but their reports always ended with confusion, with silence, with eyes that refused to meet the gaze of the grieving. Behind closed doors, however, every officer whispered the same thought they dared not write. The doll was still here. The doll would always be here, because Chucky was not a toy, not even a ghost, but a disease, is something that infected places, people, and faith itself. Those who had faced him directly carried deeper scars than those who merely whispered. Their dreams were no longer safe. At night, they wandered endless halls filled with tiny plastic footsteps, doors that opened to reveal grinning faces and voices calling them by name. Some woke with scratches etched into their skin, as if the dream had claws that reached across the barrier of sleep. Others found themselves speaking words they did not remember learning, guttural invocations that dripped from their lips like venom. Slowly, one by one, the survivors began to break not with screams, but with silence. They spoke less, ate less, existed less. They became shadows of themselves, waiting, always waiting, as though they knew something worse was coming, something larger than a single haunting. They had not destroyed him. They had awakened him. The doll had been an anchor, but without it, the spirit was free, fluid, able to seep through the cracks of the world and into every fragile mind that feared his name. Even far from the town, whispers reached others, travelers, journalists, occult seekers, exige, drawn by the legend, each hoping to catch a glimpse, to prove or disprove, to touch the edge of the nightmare. Some came and left, empty-handed but uneasy, carrying with them a sense that their shadows moved differently when no light touched them. Others never left at all, becoming part of the tapestry of rumors, their faces appearing on missing posters that curled in the rain, eyes staring blankly, as if they too had glimpsed the grinning specter that would not let them go. The legend of Chucky spread across counties, across states, across oceans, shifting from story to warning, from warning to myth, until it was impossible to tell where the truth ended and the ghost began. And in that uncertainty, he thrived. For nothing feeds a haunting more than belief. Nothing sharpens a curse more than fear spoken aloud. It is said that one night, long after the fires died and the town settled into uneasy quiet, a child's laughter rang out across the graveyard. Those who heard it swore it was not the laughter of innocence but of mockery, of hunger, of something that had found its way back into flesh, back into the world of touch and blood. A small shape was seen darting between headstones, dragging something behind it, something that gleamed like a knife under the fractured moon. They say if you followed it, if you dared, you would never see daylight again, and so no one follows. But the laughter still carries, sometimes faint, sometimes sharp, reminding every trembling soul that ghosts do not rest, curses do not fade, and dolls do not forget. The survivors may try to rebuild, to pretend, to smother their fear with routines and prayers, but deep down they know the truth. Chucky is not gone. Chucky is waiting. Chucky is watching. And as the years roll forward, the legend becomes stronger, the ghost sharper, the fear deeper. Children grow up with the story whispered like a lullaby of terror. Parents warn their little ones to keep their toys clean, their laughter pure, lest a spirit slip inside and turn play into massacre. Some scoff, some laugh, some dismiss it all as superstition. But those who know the few who still wake with laughter clawing at the edges of their dreams, they do not laugh. They keep the lights on at night. They lock every door. They pray without believing, because they understand the cruel truth. There is no ending. There never was. There is only the waiting.